Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Stuart. I'm here with Iowa State University Extension and Outreach. If anybody's not too familiar with Extension, we're kind of like a 99 county branch campus of Iowa State. So we take all the good research and evidence-based information that comes from Iowa State and deliver it to all of you, all Iowans. For me specifically, my formal title with Extension, I'm a family well-being specialist, but by trade I'm an accredited financial counselor. Also spent time as a personal financial counselor with the Iowa Army National Guard, and also on campus benefits office at Iowa State as a benefit and retirement specialist. So this is by far my favorite topic to talk about. And before I want to go into of course, with retirement planning, especially putting IPERS in, there's really only so much we can talk about in a 50-minute window. So this is going to be a pretty high-level overview. I'll try to touch upon like the key takeaways of each topic, but I will go through this kind of quickly. I do want to save time at the end for questions as well. So just so everybody knows, this did come from a 6.5-hour workshop that we do with IPERS. Called Creating a Secure Retirement. Anybody that's within 5 years of retirement is able to take that course. It's completely online right now. We partner with IPERS, and basically what you're going to see today is just expanded out through the whole day, the day-long workshop for anybody on IPERS, and again, within 5 years of retirement. So definitely encourage you to check that out if you're interested in what you hear today. I do want to read this disclaimer real quick, verbatim, just to know that everything I'm going to talk about today is strictly educational in nature. That's not even my role as an educator or as a financial counselor to provide any direct financial advice or anything like that. We'll certainly talk about different strategies and things of that nature, but ultimately the decision is up to you with what you do with the information. So in our time today, I'm just going to briefly talk about retirement income and expenses, how that looks a little different, especially during those initial transition years going from working for probably your whole life until retirement. You're essentially generating your own income at that point in time. So we'll talk about different strategies with that. Also briefly go through IPERS benefits, how that looks on a general basis. Again, highly encourage you to reach out to the IPERS retirement counselors if you have any further questions on this. The ones that we work with are, especially during the workshop, they're amazing, they're extremely knowledgeable, and they have the ability to dive down deeper and look at your specific situation, whether it be providing an estimate or just going over certain options that we're going to be talking about today. And then finally, some strategies for making it last. So for any of you that might have some income outside of IPERS, just some brief high-level strategies on making that last throughout retirement. So here's the million-dollar question. How much income do I actually need in retirement? And these pictures, particularly the one on the right, are just meant to show the different things that you're going to face in retirement. Maybe for some of us, we might be hanging out on the beach. Maybe for others, that picture looks differently. Does anybody have an idea of how much income they would need in retirement currently? No?
70 to 80%?
No? Oh, good guess. That is the best rule of thumb that we have, 70 to 80% wage replacement. It certainly could go higher or it could go lower, just completely depending on your situation. This just tends to be the average and for the things that we're going to talk about on the next slide, but there's just a lot of factors that play into this. You know, what you actually plan on doing, as I mentioned, in retirement. Maybe you're just kind of hanging out with the grandkids. Maybe you're traveling around the world, living on the beach. So that wage replacement is going to look different for everybody. As I say, personal finance is very personal. I say it a lot. I'll probably repeat it throughout the day, but I could spend all day and all day tomorrow talking about each and everything that's on one of these slides, and especially if I were to address each and every one of you's personal situation. So that's going to look different for everybody. But the 70 to 80% wage replacement ratio is a good rule of thumb for most. And primarily for the reason, a lot of these expenses for most of us are going to change in retirement. For a lot of people, they have the goal of paying off their mortgage by the time they retire, so maybe that's not an expense that will be there anymore. So instead of needing 100% of the income that you have, maybe that, depending on how much the mortgage shaves off, maybe that'll drop you down to 90%. So right off the bat, if you get that mortgage paid off, depending on how much the percent you're paying as part of your income, that could change. And of course, everything else might look different as well. I do want to kind of point out a couple that we might not think of all the time. With transportation and professional expenses, especially for teachers. This is something that I have to deal with too. We all have our attire that we have our supplies, we have our things that we haul around. Might not need those anymore in retirement. So that's something that could come off the top potentially. In transportation, that's probably not going to change a whole lot, except for the commute, of course. So there's going to be a difference there if you no longer have that commute. That's a lot of wear and tear that you no longer have on your vehicle. However, if you're flying around the world, sitting on beaches with your significant other, that might not make much of a difference. So it's really going to depend. But anything else that's not on this list, of course, it's not all-inclusive, but anything else that you can think of that might change, either for you personally or something else. The one big one I'm thinking of, you no longer have to save for retirement whenever you actually retire. So the money that comes out of your paycheck that's going towards Social Security, that's going towards your current contributions, which I believe is 6.93%. Maybe you have that number off the top of your head for IPERS. I know it's around 6% for your contribution, but right there, you have that 6% that you're putting into IPERS that is coming out of your income. You have 7.65% that's going to Social Security and Medicare out of your payroll taxes. That doesn't come out in retirement. So right off the top, dropping that wage replacement ratio from taxes and saving for retirement too. So just with those handful of things, you can see how we can easily get down to that 70 to 80% wage replacement. Other thing to keep in mind, which I know everybody's been hearing this like crazy the last few years, but inflation. So this is just a simple diagram here just to show you the impact of inflation. When we talk about income target and 50,000, that's just referring to, this is just a general example, but let's just say you can kind of go through those budgeting exercises and figure out that whatever your income was before, in retirement, you only need 50,000. But if you're not retiring for another 10 years, just with a 3% rate of inflation, which is actually closer to the historical level, not what we've been seeing in the last couple of years, 10 years, that'd be 67,000, and you can see how that goes up from there in 20 and 30 years. So nothing to be afraid of. Like I said, in the long run, it doesn't impact our our spending, our short-term budget, and our short-term financial plans like it has in the last couple of years. It's kind of spread out a little more evenly, but it's still definitely something to keep into consideration the further you look out your retirement horizon. So health insurance, I wanted to put this in here because this is going to look different for everybody. I know, of course, for a lot of state employees, and depending on your employer arrangements, you may or may not have access to health insurance policy after retirement, and particularly before the age of 65. Does anybody know what happens with health insurance at age 65? No, Medicare. Yep. Unless you fall into a different category, it's typically folks who are disabled. They might be able to be on Medicare at a little earlier age, but for the rest of us, that's 65. But if you don't have an option of continuing your employer plan into retirement, or at least until Medicare kicks in, there are some other options. Granted, they are a little pricey. Even staying on your employer plan before 65 can be a little pricey. I know at Iowa State, the premiums kind of shift. If you retire before 65, you have to pay a little more. Once you turn 65, that goes down a little bit because Medicare becomes primary, so they foot a lot more to the bill, so the employee has to pay less than premiums. But outside of Iowa State, it can be all over the place. I've worked with a lot of folks that just got cut off at retirement, regardless of the age. They couldn't have that employer coverage. So one option for those individuals could be COBRA. That's going to be probably the more pricey option up here because you would have to pay the full premium of whatever your employer-sponsored coverage is. So not just that employee premium, but whatever the employer was paying too. You'd have the same coverage. You would just be responsible for paying the full premium, and you can have that anywhere up from 18 to 36 months after employment, kind of depending on where you fall in there. But if you're retiring as early as 55, that's not going to be an option, or it could be an option, but you'll still run out of some time. So you could then look at individual policies. So look at the marketplace at healthcare.gov. If you ever want any good information about health insurance in general, I encourage you to go to that website anyways, because it's a pretty awesome educational site for all things that are health insurance related. But yeah, so if an employer plan isn't really there, either for just staying on the employer plan as part of the retirement process, or moving to COBRA, then you have to look at the marketplace. We do have elsewhere on here, but of course, since the Affordable Care Act, that really limited the different health insurance options beyond kind of what's on this page. But there still are some like catastrophic type policies out there and things of that nature. The traditional Medicare, again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to talk about this too much because it's kind of a whole another animal. But here's the website. It's just medicare.gov, kind of like the healthcare.gov. There's a lot of great information on this website too. So as you're making those plans and preparing for retirement, particularly around healthcare type of topics, I would really encourage you to go here. Take a look at the coverage levels and some of the information that they have on there. Unfortunately, I didn't have enough time in this presentation to talk about Medicare Advantage plans, but you can also find some good non-commercial information on Medicare Advantage plans on the regular Medicare site as well. But I did at least want to point this out. So if you go the traditional Medicare route, so you just want Medicare, and you've probably seen the commercials on TV, especially late at night, like Medigap or Medicare supplement plans. That's the same thing, Medigap and Medicare supplement. But that's what those are for is folks that are sticking with traditional Medicare. So they have Part A, Part B is a Bravo, Part D is a Delta, and then also the Medigap policy. And having all of these in place, looking at about $200 to about $560 a month for healthcare expenses if you decide to go this route. Regardless, you have to go one of the routes, whether it's just traditional Medicare or the Medicare Advantage. If you go to Medicare Advantage, there's not going to be a whole lot of difference in cost because you actually still have to pay Medicare Part B premium. If you go the Medicare Advantage route, so you're still always going to have, and that does change with inflation, but as of this year, you would still have that about $165 cost that comes out of Social Security to pay for Medicare. But the big difference is with Medicare Advantage, it would kind of replace all of this. Medicare gets essentially reimbursed on the back end through this that you're still paying. but you still could have a monthly premium with the Medicare Advantage plan in addition to that. So at the minimum, you'd be looking at the $165-ish, and then whatever you got to pay for the Medicare Advantage plan. And depending on whether it's like an HMO, PPO, all that good stuff, that of course will change your costs. And they're set up pretty similar just to like the plans now. Like with an HMO that's more regional or typically state-based, whereas a PPO, you have the flexibility to kind of go elsewhere. Medicare Advantage plans are set up in the same way. So that it just kind of depends. Medicare Advantage plans, they will have, or tend to have, a lot of extras in the plan, like maybe dental coverage or gym memberships, things like things that you might be able to take advantage of your current health insurance plan, like utilize any of the wellness benefits, things of that nature. But traditional Medicare does not cover those types of things. Part A is just hospitalization. Part B is just like the actual doctor's care, so your preventive care visits, outpatient care, that type of stuff. Part D is for prescription coverage, and then the Medigap or Medicare supplement policies usually just kind of cover the difference of what Medicare doesn't pay. So there's not a whole lot of bells and whistles here, and that plays a lot into the difference in the cost too, depending on which route you take. Income taxes in retirement. There's a little bit of good news with that. On the federal level, there is a higher standard deduction for folks that are over age 65, and also Social Security is only partially taxed. It kind of depends on how your income falls in different brackets. It's not the same as like federal or state income tax brackets. It's just different thresholds, but and it's relatively low, relatively speaking. I think it's somewhere around the 20,000s for single filers. It's on the Social Security website, but essentially if you're a lower income individual, whether you're single or married, you wouldn't pay any taxes on your Social Security benefit. If you fall in the middle range, and again, I might be a guess, I can't remember the ranges, but if you fall in the middle range, 50% of the benefit would be taxed, and if you fall in the highest range, it would go up to 85%. Now, that's not the tax rate, it's just the amount of your benefit that would be subject to taxes. So if you're, again, in that lower income, none of your benefit is taxable, and it just kind of slides up from there depending on where you fall. And that could change from year to year. If you have a windfall, financial windfall in any particular year, maybe with like the sale of a business, sale of a farm, something that would kind of create that large capital gains or that large tax hit, that could affect it for that one particular year. But after that, it would just go back to wherever you were before, or wherever you fall in that threshold. On a state level, thanks to changes that went into effect January 1st of this year, basically everything is exempt from income. Social Security is exempt, any railroad, military pensions, things like that, pensions, IRAs, 401ks, IPERS, pretty much everything from a retirement income standpoint is now exempt. So that made the slide super easy when I was prepping. As far as paying taxes, this is going to be, I'm not going to go too far in depth here, but I did want to bring it up because it is a little different experience for some folks. This is going to be very similar. Does anybody have a small business or a farm or anything like that, or have done it in the past? Okay. So there's probably a good chance that you made quarterly tax payments or estimated tax payments. Same exact thing in retirement. If you don't have a method to have the taxes withheld from whatever it is, so from like IPERS or say you have a 401k from somewhere, some other employment, if you don't have the ability to have that withheld directly from that type of income, or say there's like a spouse, or maybe you just have a part-time job. If they don't have, for whatever reason, the ability to withhold taxes from that, then you could expect to send them in quarterly, just like a small business or sole proprietor or something like that. And the penalty is the same too. You basically have to pay, I think it's 90% of what you did the year before if you have to take that route. Otherwise, you're penalized on that discrepancy. And again, just like a small business or farm or somebody else that has to pay that way. So anymore nowadays, it's generally not a huge deal, especially if you have some sort of retirement income from somebody. It's just a lot easier for those companies to have to withhold taxes and deal with a lot of that stuff. So I personally don't see this a whole lot in practice. Usually some folks have one method or another to be able to withhold taxes and don't have to worry about setting them in quarterly, but it's just something to keep in mind. Required minimum distributions, want to talk about that too, but not super far in depth, especially because this literally just got changed too again. The Secure Act of 2019, or the Secure Act 1.0, increased the required minimum distribution age from 70.5 to 72, meaning that if you turn 70.5 under the old rules or turn 72 in a particular tax year, you have to take a required minimum distribution from certain retirement income. That doesn't apply to IPERS, that doesn't apply to Social Security. This would be more for like an IRA, 401k, 403b, something like that. And there's a whole table where you actually figure out what the actual required minimum distribution is. The most recent Secure Act of 2022, or 2.0, bumped the ages up even further. So starting January 1st of this year, it increases to 73, and in 10 years from now, that'll increase to 75. One important takeaway, this is all on the IRS website, I don't expect anybody to remember this, but one important takeaway with required minimum distributions that often isn't mentioned, just because you have to take it doesn't mean that you have to spend it. So even though you're required to take that required minimum distribution, if it applies to your particular retirement account, if you don't need that money, you can just put it in a savings account or something that's not tax deferred, like retirement related, a CD, savings account, whatever. If you do need it, that's fine. But if you don't, you certainly don't have to spend it.
Do you have to take like a certain percentage then you're saying? Does it have to be like a certain percentage or a certain amount?
Yeah, a certain, so it really comes out to a certain percentage. There's life expectancy tables, and that's also on the IRS website, depending on where you fall in the life expectancy table and how much you have and everything. It's kind of just based on that equation. So I think I remember seeing a table once, like for a lot of people at the beginning, and this was before all these changes, so this might not be accurate. I remember it was somewhere between like 3 or 4% that it started out with, and then it progressively got higher the older that you get. I don't remember what percentage it went up to, but for folks just right around 62, 65, kind of just starting out, it was around 3 or 4% and kind of had that gradual increase. So it's not like a giant hit for a lot of people at first, but it does turn into that. And it could be a big hit for some folks. Social Security, this is a good screenshot of the website. I'm not going to go a whole lot in depth on this just because, like Medicare, it's kind of a whole lot another animal. The one thing I would encourage you to do though, with Social Security, it doesn't matter how far away you are from retirement. I do this as an exercise with my undergraduate students on a class I teach on campus. For those that are comfortable with doing it, I have them go create a Social Security account and pull their statement and look at different things on there. I would encourage you to do that as soon as you can. Multiple reasons. One being, if somebody ever gets your information and you don't have an account created, they could very easily go and do that for you, kind of just like any other account. But obviously, you have a little more skin in the game with Social Security as maybe your high V card account or something. So I would encourage you to do it for security purposes. But also, when you look at your statement, there's a lot of good information in there that people might not be too familiar with. Your full earnings history is in there. And even a couple of my students this semester that are, I don't know, 18 to 21, found a couple of errors in their earnings history. It very might well been due to they just didn't work long enough, maybe in that particular employment, to pay into Social Security or something like that. There could be a very good reason for it, other than just an error. But with whenever they calculate your benefit, they look back at your 35 years, or top 35 years of earnings history. So going back, 20, 30 years ago, not all of us can remember what we made back then, I'm sure. So we have that nice little handy statement to be able to go through and look and see if there's anything that looks out of place. One other thing I want to mention with this, they do provide benefit estimates. Those are in today's dollars. So, and they do update every year. Anybody that does have a Social Security account probably recently got the email notification from them that your new statement is ready, and that's probably because we just got past tax season too. So they just updated your statement with your most recent earnings history and taxes that you paid in, so you can look through all that too. But they do put it in today's dollars, so it helps a lot more with that wage replacement that we talked about before, trying to figure out your budget. What that looks like, years from now, as opposed to in today's dollars. It's nice that they do it in today's dollars, so you don't have to worry about inflation and trying to estimate that for that. So another good thing about the website. And finally, before we move into IPERS real quick, as I mentioned, personal finance is just so personal. There's so many different things that can impact your income and expenses in retirement. All the things that we talked about, and also when to claim Social Security benefits. That's another thing to highlight there. Just because you turn a certain age doesn't necessarily mean that you actually have to start claiming your benefits. You could very easily retire at 62 when you're first eligible to start claiming, but maybe you get a part-time job or just want to wait for one reason or another. Maybe your IPERS income or something else is enough at that time, and you just kind of want to let it sit and grow. It will continue to do that. So some people just might delay that to 65, maybe even 70. Those 3 years after your full retirement age, your Social Security benefit goes up by 8% each year. Some people hold out for that if they have other means of income that'll get them by before that age. So retiring and claiming Social Security aren't necessarily mutual decisions. IPERS. And again, this is going to be pretty high level, just because there's a lot of ins and outs of it. IPERS is the largest public trust fund, or public retirement system in the state, with, as when they made the slide, approximately $45 billion in their fund that they manage for folks that have IPERS. It is to be considered to be a defined benefit program, very similar to Social Security. There's a lot of similarities between IPERS and Social Security on a fundamental level, like how they operate. But there are some differences, like the contribution rate. You pay 6.29%. Your employer pays 9.44%. It's similar to Social Security, where both the employee and the employer put in 6.2% towards that. So the benefit calculation is also kind of similar. It's your average salary based on a multiplier, which is based on your years of service, minus any reduction if you retire before one of the normal retirement ages. And there's some similarities with that with Social Security and other pensions out there as well. But of course, the more you make and or the more you stick around, the higher your benefit's going to be. Members will become vested after 7 years or 28 quarters. And the most important thing about vesting is just what it entitles you to. You're always going to be 100% vested in your own contributions. So the contributions that you make, if you leave 6 years later, that money's still yours. The employer portion, no. Unfortunately, you got to be there the full 7 years. And as they mentioned, you're also entitled to that monthly retirement or the disability benefit. The portion of the employer's investment, if a refund is taken ahead of time, so if you don't make it to full retirement age and decide to cash out. And also service purchase at retirement, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Here are the normal retirement ages. Rule of 88, so if you'd like to retire at 55, you have to have 33 years of service for that. Or it can be the rule of 62 and 20, which is age 62 and 20 or more years of service. Or if you hit age 65, there is no minimum service requirement if you turn 65. Here's the reduction. I'm not going to go through this in full either, but just know that if you do retire before one of those normal retirement ages, your benefit just will be reduced by a little bit. So as of July 12th, 6% a year from age 65. So it just kind of depends on where it goes in there, but it will be reduced if it's before that normal retirement age on the previous slide. You can also make service purchases to increase your benefit. It'll increase your quarters of service, which will then, again, increase the benefit. It's purchased at retirement. There are some some ability to get free credit under certain circumstances, particularly military duty, FMLA, or leave of absences. Definitely request this before, well, you can't do it after, but like everything else, request information on this with planning ahead of time, so that way they can give you a little bit of an estimate of what it would look like for your benefit. And they make the suggestion that save the money in a separate retirement account that can eventually be rolled over to IPERS to make your purchase. So if you had like an outside 403B or something like that we talked about before, you could use some of that money to make that purchase. The types, there's a 5-year limit basically on any type of service, any type of non-qualified service, excuse me. It is expensive, but if you, again, have the money, maybe in a separate account or something like that, and would much rather have that boosted monthly benefit under IPERS as opposed to that lump sum in another account, you can purchase up to 5 years just kind of out of the blue. You don't have to fall under any of these other categories. Like if you worked at a previous IPERS position and decided to take a refund of the money, you can buy back that service. Other public systems, if you moved here from another state, there's potential there. As long as you're not eligible to draw money on that other pension, active duty military, leave of absence, that's different. So active duty military, not eligible for the free credit. And then there's this buy-up credit conversion for hybrid members, but I'm not sure if that would impact anybody here. Retirement estimates, whether they be the service purchase or just a general retirement estimate, it's similar with Social Security. You can request those and get an idea of what your benefits look like based on your current service and earnings history. If you want to start preparing for that. Of course, working a little longer could actually increase your benefits significantly just because of how the equation, I know that might seem a little obvious, but it's really, from a mathematical standpoint, how the equation is set up. Just simply working a little longer would actually have quite a bit of impact on your benefit. And of course, you might be able to retire a little bit earlier than expected if you get one of those retirement estimates in time. Benefit payment options. There's 6 different payment options, and by payment options, now we're kind of shifting into you're eligible for retirement, now you're getting that monthly annuity or payment or whatever word you want to tie to it. There's different options, and this, more so than anything, is really dependent on your particular situation. It's really dependent on if you're married or not. I know it's a very uncomfortable topic or conversation to have, but life expectancies, if there's like a significant difference in life expectancy between you and your spouse, these different options are going to come into play. Or if there's like a significant, perhaps earning gap in benefit amount between you and your spouse, this would come into play. Option number 1, I want to make sure I've run out of time. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly to make sure I get through everything. But option number 1 is a guaranteed death benefit in $1,000 increments. And by death benefit, I mean a lump sum that would be paid out to you, not taking over that other person's monthly benefit when they pass. There are options for that, but by death benefit, just referring to the one-time payout. So the maximum death benefit is $18,000, and in this particular example, if you had a lifetime benefit of approximately $1,600 per month, it would drop it down to around $1,583. So essentially, it's like a life insurance policy. Like you're paying $17 a month for this death benefit of $18,000. That's basically what a life insurance policy does. So you could certainly take that option if you're paying a lot more for life insurance and wanted to have that in retirement. This would be a good option for that. Option number 2 is the death benefit. Again, staying on that topic, what we just talked about, only if there's an investment balance remaining. So again, I know this is a tough conversation, but essentially maybe if there is an anticipated early death, this might be a good option because there'd be more of a likelihood that some of that initial investment would be remaining. That would then get paid out to whoever the beneficiary is. So option 2 is probably more of those particular circumstances. Option 3, no death benefit. There's no other benefits. This is good for maybe single folks. Or if you're married, maybe if you have pretty equal income, like everything else is pretty equal, if you just want to max out that monthly benefit and only have it paid during your lifetime, option 3 is the one you choose for that. Option 4 is a dual life annuity. And all this is showing on here, so we'll just kind of stick with that same like $1,600 a month example that they've been using. You're essentially giving up some of your, and I know it's hard to see too, but you're giving up some of your monthly benefit in your lifetime in order for your significant other to receive something, 25% or 50% or 75%, whatever you choose, once you pass away. So that would be an option there. This is a much deeper conversation when you do have those mismatches with like life expectancy or income or something. You may want to take a little less now in order to provide a little more later. And this would be on a monthly basis. Same thing with this guaranteed 10-year monthly benefit payment. You're essentially just giving up a little bit more of your money to give to somebody else, but it's only for a 10-year period. If you lived past that period, there wouldn't be any benefit from that. So it's just to guarantee a 10-year period. And something like this, kind of like option 2, this might be beneficial if there's kind of an expectation that unfortunately the person may pass away early. This would provide the other individual at least a little bit of a monthly benefit. And option 6, it's pretty much the same thing, dual life annuity, but there's a pop-up feature for another member. So essentially there's a lifetime monthly benefit for you, a lifetime monthly benefit for a contingent annuitant, and I'll talk about what that term means. But your monthly benefit would actually go up and be a little more, or I don't want to explain this. It would be more, I'll just read it. Your monthly benefit will increase to the amount you would have received if you had chosen option 2. There we go. So going back to option 2, the one that didn't have the extra benefit that would continue, this one would actually pop up to the higher benefit, again, at the expense of your monthly benefit during your lifetime. So you can see if you wanted to give up 100% of your monthly amount, that original like $1,600 would drop down to about $1,478, which for some people is a pretty good drop on a monthly basis. So with options 1, 2, and 5, your beneficiary or beneficiaries can be changed at any time as long as the death benefit is not being paid out. And again, when I say beneficiary, that's more of that lump sum payout. So if you're looking at it as kind of like a life insurance, or with your 401k, IRA beneficiary there, they would just get a lump sum. There's options that they could do with that. But when we say beneficiary here, we're referring to that. With option 3, there's no beneficiary because it's just a single only benefit. With options 4 and 6, though, this contingent annuitant is the person, generally a spouse, or somebody else that had a legal entitlement to that money. They would be the contingent annuitant, meaning they would get that whatever benefit that you chose after you pass away in retirement, which is different from the beneficiary who would receive the lump sum under those other options. So there is a difference there. This talks about the pre-retirement death benefits, typically made out in a lump sum. It would be some portion of your, well, of course, you would have all of your contributions, depending on if you're vested or not. There may be some of those employer contributions, but designating a beneficiary is key with that, just like other types of insurances. As I mentioned before, you have to be at least 55, submit a completed application, benefits will be paid on the last day of the month, must terminate employment unless you're at the age of 70, which you could still keep working if you wanted to, and not have to terminate. And the reason for that is because of these reemployment guidelines. And I'm going to go through these pretty quick too, because I know we're running out of time. But essentially, what all of this is saying is you have to have a bona fide retirement. This one can't even enter into a verbal or written agreement within 1 month of retirement. And if you actually perform any of those duties within the first 4 months, you could be penalized for that. So moral of the story here, just wait a little bit. If you're one of those people that just wants to get back into the workforce, if IPERS is coming into play, just hang tight a little bit. Just wait for 6 months until you start having these conversations, but at the minimum, at least 4 months, so you don't get that penalty. So making a last, this is just going to be for if you have any other types of retirement income outside of Social Security or IPERS. Has anybody heard of the 4% rule? That's a pretty good rule of thumb. If you don't have any official retirement plan, like if you're not meeting with somebody or don't have something else in place, based on this example, if you had a $300,000, let's say a 401k, you would take 4% in year 1, which in this example would come out to $12,000 or $1,000 per month. And then every year after that, you would just make an inflation adjustment. So we just use 3% because that's the long run. You'd go back to that original 12,000 you took in year one, bump it up by 3%. That's what you take in year two, and then just keep going. If inflation happens to be a little higher in the following year, you do the inflation adjustment and say 5%, and you would essentially just be multiplying this number by 1.05, and that would give you the next withdrawal the year after that. And there's actually some research based on the 4% rule. This actually has a probability of 90 to 95% if for a 30-year period, if invested in 50% stocks and 50% bonds. This is research done back in the early 90s, so it definitely is a little outdated, and people are kind of on the fence about which way to go. But at least as of 30 years ago, this has a 90 to 95% probability of lasting 30 years in retirement if invested 50-50 in stocks and bonds. 4% is just a floor. As I mentioned, it could be higher for some folks. It just kind of depends on your situation. This does require a little more monitoring because you have to pay attention to inflation, your account balances, and all that good stuff. Again, it is based on real data, essentially throughout the history of the, I think they use the S&P 500 for this. There's no, past performance does not always guarantee future returns. So that's always something to keep in mind. Anytime you have money in the market, yes, we have some good historical data that we can use from nearly 100 years, but it still doesn't necessarily guarantee future returns. And some folks just decide to do the required minimum distribution, take that as opposed to the 4% rule. As I mentioned with the market, it is subject to fluctuations, of course. We've seen that just in the last 5 years, crazy fluctuations. But it does give us an opportunity for long-term growth. That's what does allow it. As you can see, this graph is just kind of a snippet of some portion of the S&P 500 over time. While we do have these super huge down years, which probably associate with one of the recessions or another, there's the general upturn throughout the years. And taking advantage of that volatility and that general upturn provides a long-term growth. And if values are down, always keep in mind it's really only a loss if you need to sell. And on top of that, it's really only a loss if it's a loss relative to what you actually purchased or made that contribution for, say, 20 or 30 years ago. So it's not necessarily a loss just because you happen to be selling on one particular day that's 40 years in the future that happens to be in the red. So something to keep in mind as well. There's a variety of reasons for shifting your money around and keeping that asset allocation, particularly at retirement. If you need to have a little bit of a reserve fund build up, maybe to purchase a different annuity if you need a little more guaranteed income, or just general restructuring or diversification if that does apply to you. And we do recommend a gradual shift, just like through your working life course. I recommend doing that throughout the years, even not constantly, but kind of sticking to that asset allocation that you have either through an advisor or that you determine for yourself, and just do gradual shifts over time. When it comes to seeking a financial advisor, do your research. That's the biggest takeaway from this. The main consideration, fiduciary responsibility versus suitability standard. I actually wasn't aware of this for the longest time, but with my particular designation as a financial counselor, I have ethics training built in every single year, just so CFPs do as well. We are considered to be fiduciaries, so anything you would ever hear from me is only to benefit you. It doesn't benefit me in any way, shape, or form. The suitability standard, though, if you happen to meet with somebody out in town in like a for-profit, one of the for-profit places that you see around, If they didn't have one of those particular designations, they just kind of have to follow the suitability standard, which means that they can present like 4 different financial plans. As long as those 4 financial plans are technically suitable for you, they have all the authority in the world to pick the one that makes them the most money. That's the suitability standard. There's some good financial calculators on the FINRA website. FINRA is kind of like a quasi-government agency for those who aren't familiar, but this one's super good. It has a ton of different inputs on there that you can type it in if you want to take the kind of do-it-yourself approach with retirement planning. IPERS also has a ton on their website as well, so I encourage you to use those. And that's it. Sorry to go so fast, but like I said, this is a 6.5-hour workshop that I condensed for you all today. I have some business cards somewhere if anybody wants one. I do, through extension, one-on-one financial consultations that are completely free, unbiased, and confidential. If anybody has any questions, otherwise I really encourage you to reach out to IPERS directly if you have any questions about the information today, and if you're within 5 years of retirement. Check out the IPERS website, look for Creating a Secure Retirement, and you can join us for the full day workshop on this. And that's all I have for you folks.
Ryan,
Yes.
is there a time length that you have to, say you want to start drawing your IPERS? Is it like, do you have to tell them 6 months ahead of time? Do you have to tell them, is there a time limit?
That's a good question.
Can you tell them in May that you want to retire that year, and then you have to tell them like
Well, you don't really have to tell IPERS. It would just be your
employer.
Yeah.
So IPERS you can collect the next month, then, I'm saying? So
Well,
how soon can you start collecting your IPERS if you're eligible?
Oh, it'd be within a month for
Within a
your
month,
retirement.
okay.
Yeah, but that's dependent on your employer.
Right.
As far as estimates, though, if you want that, you can contact them at any point. You can have 30 years away and contact them for an estimate.
Okay, one question. You said for to be vested it had to be 7 years?
7 years or 28 quarters.
At the same school?
No, just with an IPERS.
Want to make sure.
Yep, and that's where the 28 quarters comes into play too, because some people are kind of back and forth, or like switch districts or something. But